Hey all, hope you enjoy and share this short interview I did on GB News Mainstream the other day on the Mark Dolan show, and Dr. David Unwin was there also, who's pretty much a genius at reversing or putting type 2 diabetes into remission. So great short interview, and the answer to type 2 diabetes is not as complex as you might think. Last thing I'll say is please do head over to metabolicduo.com. That's metabolicduo.com, and consider signing up for myself and Gabor Doshi, where we'll go way beyond the short advice in this clip and explain any and everything around achieving metabolic health, productivity and longevity. So with that, here's the piece.
And a report published by the charity Diabetes UK shows that Britain has reached an unfortunate milestone, with 5 million people now living with diabetes. 90% of whom are suffering type 2 diabetes, which, unlike type 1, is linked to diet, lifestyle and conditions like obesity. Well, joining me now are two men who have some good news for you. They believe that your type 2 diabetes or that of your friends or family could potentially be reversed or sent into remission without the need for medication. How so? Well, Dr. David Unwin is an NHS GP who has tackled the diabetes of scores of his patients and dramatically reduced their waistlines as well. His revolutionary method was serialised in the Daily Mail newspaper, demonstrating startling results for readers. I'm also delighted to welcome a man who has been the perpetual voice of reason during the COVID-19 pandemic, calling out the madness of lockdowns and mask mandates, Ivor Cummins, a biochemical engineer who previously made his name in the public eye as a vociferous proponent for the low-carbohydrate lifestyle. Gentlemen, welcome to Mark Dolan tonight. Dr. Unwin, can type 2 diabetes be reversed?
Definitely, only I would call it remission. I would call it remission because that's just a reminder that if you go back to the lifestyle that created that type 2 diabetes in the first place, the condition will come back. What we found, so I'm a GP from the north of England, and we really got fed up waiting for some sort of solution to the epidemic of type 2 diabetes. And we decided 10 years ago that we'd do something about it. And we've been pioneering an approach where we encourage people to cut back on the foods that put up the blood sugar, because it's this increase in blood sugar that does the damage over time. And we find that of the people who engage with improving their diet, 50% of them are so proud and delighted because they're getting drug-free remission of their diabetes. And that's actually saving the practice money because we're spending £68,000 less every year on the diabetes drug budget, and we've been doing that for years now. We feel that... Yes, go ahead.
Dr. Unwin, sorry to interrupt you. What's in and what's out? It's not a complicated way of eating, is it?
No, it's about looking at your diet and working out what puts up your blood sugar. So obviously, sugar itself is going to do that. But I think the thing that catches many people out are starchy carbs, which, although not being sugar, digest down into surprising amounts of sugar. So these are things like bread, breakfast cereals, rice, potatoes, these things, which put your blood sugar up. So our patients eat other things instead of starchy carbs and sugary foods.
So what are you eating instead?
Right. So I've been on this diet for 10 years. So I'm basing my meals on protein. So that's fish, eggs, cheese, meat, that kind of thing. And then I have loads of green veg. So I'm replacing the white stuff with green stuff. So I eat far more green veg and hardly any white starchy carbs.
Now, Ivor Cummins, it's great to have you back on the show. It seems the root of the explosion in type 2 diabetes is in relation to dietary guidelines issued by most governments over the last few decades. Where, in your view, have they been going wrong?
Yeah, Mark. Well, essentially the dietary guidelines were well intentioned, but unfortunately they got some things wrong. So David just described what he's eating, and essentially the dietary guidelines said that meat and eggs and cheese were kind of bad. So they made a mistake there. And unfortunately, what really went wrong is the food industry jumped onto these scientific guidelines and said, okay, we'll give you cheap vegetable oils and cheap starches, the white stuff, refined grains and sugars, and we'll supply you with the so-called healthy foods. So BMJ a few years ago had a paper, and they showed that 60% of UK calories are now coming from ultra-processed foods. And that's an astonishing amount of kind of toxic food stuff to be eating, obviously. But I always say the devil's triad is the root cause of diabetes and much chronic disease. And that's sugar, refined grains, refined carbs, and vegetable or seed oils. So essentially, that's what makes up most of the ultra-processed food in your supermarket. And that's most of the calories that, unfortunately, the humans are eating.
Now, Ivor, what would you say to those arguing that this is quackery or even dangerous, particularly if this diet involves eating more saturated fat? People might lose weight, but they're going to have a massive heart attack, aren't they?
Well, you see, this is the age-old problem, because mistaken paradigms have taken hold now and been supported massively by industry. So I think everyone will agree with what I just said about sugar, refined grains and seed oils from factories. And to not eat those, you have to eat what Dr. Unwin eats, meat, fish and eggs and vegetables, meat and 2 veg. The suggestion that saturated fat from natural, wholesome, human evolutionary foods is problematic is kind of absurd. And I think we're increasingly seeing now more and more publications beginning to call this out. The quackery is the false paradigm of 50 years ago that sadly became established in the nutrition and health community.
Indeed. A good friend of the show, Dr. Ken Berry, who'll be familiar to both of you, told me that when he was younger, he was putting on weight, he was unfit. So he went back to the medical textbooks and he looked up exactly what to do to lose weight and be healthier. And he gained weight. David, it's time to challenge the orthodoxy, isn't it? Why aren't more NHS GPs replicating your success?
That's a very good question. I mean, why wasn't I doing it before? And I think I was exhausted. I was tired out, and I was busily doing what I was trained to do, which was use medication. Now, medication does have a part to play, but I wasn't thinking about the actual cause of type 2 diabetes. And if we're going to treat this condition, we need to think what's causing it and do the opposite. So, I mean, what sparked me into action was we've had a 9-fold increase in the number of people with type 2 diabetes in the same practice since I was a young man. And this is another epidemic, another pandemic. I think it is. It's the ultra-processed food. And I think it's it's difficult to do something differently. We were pioneers in this, but now other GPs are actually doing it. And the Royal College of General Practitioners has published an e-learning module free to every GP in the country on how to do this. So there is hope, but I am disappointed it's taking longer than I thought it would. And I'm just hoping that doctors listening to this at least are going to think about why not just cut back the foods that put up blood sugar.
David, last time we spoke, you said you were close to resigning as a GP, retiring because it was so hopeless. Your patients were getting fatter and more diabetic. They've cut the carbs. Tell me how transformative it has been for your patients. Tell me about the difference you've seen in their lives and in their health.
In every clinic I do, I'm seeing people coming in to shake my hand or give me a hug. They're so amazed, so proud. They've lost weight, they feel better, they've come off medication. They never expected to feel better. They saw type 2 diabetes as a a chronic deteriorating condition. And I can't tell you how brilliant it is to be celebrating with them that they've come off medication, they've lost weight, their blood pressure's better. And just to answer what you said before, we've actually been studying the lipid profiles, the cholesterol of all the people who've gone low carb, and the lipid profiles have actually improved. There are less cardiovascular risk now than when they started. So the whole thing's just cheerful fun. They can't get rid of me.
Well, look, I'm going to give details about how to find out more about your work. Ivor, before you go, you've been heroic throughout the pandemic, and you've been calling out mainstream scientists and medical professionals pushing for debatable lockdowns, masking and vaccine mandates. You're an engineer. You've just crunched the numbers. You've looked at the data. It didn't add up to you. You're now raising questions about public health policies of mainstream scientists in regards to nutrition and cardiovascular health. What's your appraisal of the reputation of mainstream science, given the fact that you disagree with most of it?
Yeah, well, as I mentioned earlier or alluded to, mainstream science was kind of captured, but over many, many decades. There's no conspiracy theory. It's a kind of an enormous groupthink that just grew from a powerful paradigm, and it made sense, and there was a confluence of interests, the food companies, the nutrition, education companies. It's just a sad story. So mainstream now is funded by kind of governments or pharmaceutical industry or food industry, a lot of the advertising. And as a result, you know, the message tends to flow from those sources. And that's just the situation we're in. I might add that my record for remission of diabetes personally was an internal medicine specialist doctor in Denver in March 2020. I met him and he ran up and hugged me. I didn't know him. And using insulin measurements after getting myself and Dr. Gerber's book and switching to real foods, meat, fish and eggs and vegetables, in 10 days his blood insulin showed him as non-diabetic. Now, I hasten to add, blood insulin will show you a lot faster than blood glucose and other measures of type 2 diabetes. So he had a speedy measurement. But 10 days he switched from high insulin type 2 diabetes to normal insulin, technically non-type 2 diabetic.
Ivor Cummins' brilliant podcast is called The Fat Emperor, which covers all aspects of health and science. Find him on YouTube as well, or on Twitter at Fat Emperor. Meanwhile, Dr. David Unwin can be found at Low Carb GP on Twitter, or search Dr. David Unwin online for his recipes and articles, which are featured in The Guardian, The Mail and the Diabetes UK website. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time.
I did this piece actually from a rundown cottage with limited internet, so the quality ain't perfect, but there you go. And just again to mention, metabolicduo.com, super if you guys can share it out with friends or family, anyone who has metabolic health issues or weight loss plateaus or issues losing weight or any of the myriad modern chronic disease problems that can be eminently addressed with really good hardcore science, fully decoded, hard science made simple. So metabolicduo.com, hope to see you over there.